Welcome to Can We Have a Conversation? This is another segment of a conversation that I think everybody would want to hear. I know we have people tuning in from Africa, we have people tuning in from Canada, and also from the Bahamas. But before we get started on this show, I want to introduce our guest, which is a friend of mine, and he's not really a guest. This is his second time, so he's family now. But he has written a book that I thought was very interesting. It's called The Cornerstone of Responsible Fatherhood. It talks about planning, it talks about implementation and evaluation. And I have taken this book, I've read it almost twice now. And I am, even though I've had my program for quite some time, I'm implementing these things that he has in his book because it's like a blueprint, it's like a manual to implementing a fatherhood program. So, Dr. J, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, Dr. P. It's my pleasure to be with you and your listening audience. And I'm glad you're getting out of the book what the real intention was of the book. And that was to be a toolkit for planning and implementing a fatherhood program.
Absolutely. Let me ask you, what got you interested in developing a career in the responsible fatherhood field?
Well, part of it, was my life experience with my own father. I didn't know it at the time, what I mean. But my father was an example of, an involved and engaged father. Even though he was only in my life for 12 years, I can't even imagine what my life would have been like without the memories of him, being present in my life and coaching him. Something that I learned later on in life, or as once I matured, that's what he was doing. Exposed me to different things. He participated in every baseball game, every instrumental recital at the school, and those are things that left an indelible impression on me. And so, as I began to do my work, I started off as a high school African American history teacher and I found a father figure at the University of Michigan, a guy named Dr. Leonard Sain, who really kind of took me under his wing and made me believe I could do things that I didn't even know I could do. But I think what he did, he saw himself in me when he was young, and he coached me and had me think of myself in a much bigger way in education. In fact, when I got my PhD, I was on the trajectory of being a school superintendent.
Mm.
I think that whole notion of education has remained with me even as I've begun to do nonprofit work in the area of working with parents and working with parents with different challenges. I still see myself as an educator, and that I and how I train and teach others how to work with parents is as educators. And I take the United Negro College Fund theme of a mind is a terrible thing to waste. And so when you're with parents and you're coaching them and trying to help them be the best they can be, we need to approach that from an educational point of view. And and what education does, it makes you aware of what your options are. But education is also intentional, that you start out with an objective, you have a goal in mind, and everything you do moves towards that end goal. And that a lot of folks who do fatherhood work, for example, when they don't have a guide, they do good work because it's important just to talk to people and build relationship. But sometimes the conversation just spins and spins and spins, and then you catch yourself and you say, well, what have we done here? And you find that maybe you didn't do very much, but kind of vent and got some stuff off your chest. But as far as education is concerned, you didn't fulfill a specific objective. And I don't mean to, see that in a way that's overwhelming to folk, but just being very intentional
Mhm.
about what it is we're trying to do with fathers, so that at the end of the day, you can say that he passed, not a B or C, but he passed. That you could document that pass based on the knowledge he's gained from your program, that you've seen some changes in attitude from the time that he entered your program. And then down the road, anybody can see that the behavior, this transformed behavior that they can now witness as a result of what they've learned through the program that you have implemented. And that's what the quite frankly, Cornerstones is all about. It's trying to get you to understand where you are and where you need to go, so that investors, public, private individuals who want to invest in you to sustain your program over time.
Mm. It's interesting. You said you had your father for only 12 years, but he left such an imprint in your life and an impact that you would wanting to go out and share that information. I mean, there's men, and I think you and I have had this conversation before, that has grown up without a father, and they're hurting and they still miss that boy. They're 70, 75 years old. And I'm not kidding. I've talked to men 70 to 75 years old that still has that hurt and that pain that they grew up without a father.
And that's what we got to change. All right. And again, that's the past. And what can we do to make sure that every child has the benefit of a loving father when there's ever is possible? It's not always possible, Dr. P, because in many respects, a lot of that is depending upon the initial relationship between mom and dad. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And because mom and dad may have had that child, but mom and dad may not have been a couple.
Mm-hmm.
All right. They may have been a romantic sexual interest, and that's all. You know what I mean? And I really pray to God for mercy and grace, for those children, who didn't ask to come into the world, but they're here now. And what we got to do as practitioners, when we see that, we got to we cover them the best way we can. I am absolutely ruthless in my quest to make sure that children are covered, that children don't waddle in the public welfare system, and that children aspire to reach all their God-given potential, and to make sure that that expectations are clear and high. No one responds to low expectations, and fundamentally, you have to believe in the dignity and worth of those parents, even though they made some choices that left that child almost abandoned, but also the mercy and grace that we want for those children to be able to be resilient and overcome those things, and then be dedicated through their exposures, through some of the programs that you and I do, to breaking that cycle, so that every child, is on the destiny of greatness. We're all here for a purpose, and so in our job as stewards is to ensure that every child has every opportunity to grow and develop into be the best that they can be, because they are the boundless resource. That's the boundless resource. And I think that what I learned from my father is that if I could connect with the blessings from God, and to connect that with with a faith walk, that I could be a contributor to overcoming some of the challenges that that people in need really need help in. And so that's kind of I didn't know that I was going to end up doing the fatherhood work until about 34 years ago, when I started doing a lot of work around the education of Black males. I wrote a book called The Endangered Black Male, the New Bald Eagle. And the significance of that book, it started off as a paper, was to look at the challenges being faced by African-American men, even though we had been mighty contributors to nation building. You know what I mean? We fought in the Revolutionary War. We came over as indentured servants. We fought in the Revolutionary War. We fought in the War of 1812. We fought, in the Civil War. We fought, in World War One. We fought in World War Two. And we've always delivered, for the society, but yet and still, the society has allowed, a lot of our African-American men and our boys kind of fall through the crack. And so the whole idea behind the bald eagle is to say, look, here it is, a bird, is identified as the national bird, and what the government did when that bird became endangered was put in place all types of preservation measures to make sure that bald eagle would soar again. Yet and still, we have not put in similar preservation measures for African American men and boys. And so the conclusion of the book was that if we're going to preserve African American men and boys, African American men have to be in the forefront. We can't do it by ourselves, but we have to be the coaches, the shepherds, the stewards, and we have the vanguards in doing that, and then enlist others to join us. But if we're going to preserve ourselves, it starts with ourselves. We can't leave that on anybody else. And if we try to, history will tell us that we will fail because people will not care about you as much as you care about yourself. And if we have God on our side, that's what it's all about. That's the history of African Americans in this country. That's our journey. That's our faith walk. And God has enabled us to be not only survivors but thrivers in being able to be an example of God's people here on earth.
That leads right into our next segment. For men and women who are interested in this kind of work, what advice would you give them about getting involved in this fatherhood movement?
Well, I would say check yourself at the door, all right? Because, it's very important in doing this work that you check whatever baggage or biases that you have about fathers before you begin to work. A lot of folks enter the fatherhood work, and some have, with a chip on their shoulder, and fundamentally don't believe in the value and worth of men in their lives. And some of that, quite frankly, is cultural. Some of it is just, the generational legacy of certain families. And so I would say the first thing that one has to do is check themselves at the door and to really understand how important it is to do this work and to see working with fathers as an asset and not a liability, and that everybody deserves, I don't believe in second chances. I believe in 50 chances, you know what I mean? Because, it's about, being able to correct the behavior. And sometimes it takes longer for others, but you have to believe that people can do it, and that's so important in doing this work. And then I think the other thing is to understand, just like in any other field of work, any other sector of work, I don't care if it's business. For example, you got Google laying off thousands of folks. And you would think that Google, being the high tech firm that it is, or the software giant in terms of social media, that they would not have any problems keeping people employed. They're laying off folks. General Motors is laying off folks. Walmart is just getting ready to close a store in Washington D.C. in a neighborhood that really needs Walmart. What am I saying? What am I saying is that any job you get into, there will be ups and downs. And so as you enter the fatherhood field, don't look at it in a kind of a Pollyannic type of way, in a way that, well, if I do this, I better get a job and it better last forever. No, it ain't gonna last forever. There was a former Secretary of Education. His name was John Gardner, and he wrote this book called Self-Renewal. And this book was written 40-something years ago. And what Gardner said in his book that just stuck with me over the years, he said that the successful person of the future will not only know how to do one job, but will know how to do several jobs well. Okay. And so the thing is that this is a field just like any other, career endeavor that you go into. And it's going to have the ups and downs. It's going to have periods when you have high employment. It's going to have periods when there is challenges for keeping the door open on your program. But I'm a living example of 32 years of continuous work in the fatherhood field. I've put my children through college. I took my children around the world doing this work, and I still earn enough money to take vacations from time to time. And so what I'm saying is that if you believe in it, and you believe in the people that you're working with, and that you understand that that it's the highs and lows of any uh, career or job area, uh, and uh, and you'll be fine, But
Mm-hmm.
it starts with you, and it starts with believing in the folks. I fundamentally believe in the value and dignity of parents, and that even though some parents start out without not all the tools that they need to raise a successful family, I think they can be taught that, But you got to meet them where they are, believe in them, and stay with them. You know what I mean? And every day I wake up, Stuart, I thank God for redemption. You know what
Mm.
I mean? I
I
say,
know that's right.
go, go. You know what I mean? Where would I be without redemption?
Mm.
And so, and I think that this notion of helping people be the best they can be, there's no greater life's work that you can do,
Mm.
and that is what makes families better. That ultimately makes the world better. And so I'm a soldier on the battlefield, really trying to serve the people in a way that we can grow ourselves as family and as a nation.
Mm-hmm.
Within a nation, and I don't mean that as anti-nation. I just mean
Mm-hmm.
that I was listening to your sermon the other day, no more diaspora. What that says to me is that we own as much as the United States as anybody else,
Mm-hmm.
and we're not outsiders. We're founders. All
Mm.
right, we're founders. We've been around, and if you total up our worth, for what we've done, we'd be richer than the Rockefellers, the Trumps, the Steve Bezos and others, because of what we've done. And so there's no amount of money that can that we could be given to rectify the wrongs that have happened to us, and the setbacks financially that
Mm-hmm.
we've had to overcome to uh, call ourselves whole. And so, but I'm a firm believer that one can't walk around as a victim. You got to walk around in victory.
Mm.
And the victory is being able to wake up every day with another chance to do better and to make others people's lives better, if you can.
You know, you talk about this thing as fatherhood, and I believe that for a man, that's the highest title that a man could ever have.
Yes.
I mean, when we speak about God, God gave us the same name that He has,
Mm-hmm.
Father.
Mm-hmm. Abba,
Abba,
Daddy.
and so, there's folks listening all over, over 100 countries. They're listening to this interview, and my sense is the responsible fatherhood is an issue for many of our audience. Uh, for those interested in developing fatherhood initiatives in, the respective jurisdiction, wherever they are, what advice would you give them regarding? I'll give these to you, and then we'll go back. A, becoming knowledgeable about best fatherhood practice. B, encouraging policymakers to support the work. C, pursuing the necessary training to do the work effectively. And D, developing and organizing a sustainable advocacy process for the benefit of fathers and families that will be the benefactors of the services offered. So I'll start with becoming knowledgeable about best fatherhood practice.
Well, it's interesting. We have to look at our history. Again, your sermon title was "No Diaspora Anymore," but there is, in fact, it is a diaspora in the sense of there's a common set of struggle that people of African descent has have to go through. Since the transatlantic slave trade and the colonialism that followed in countries around the world, even the continent of Africa, Europe. People, for example, a lot of people don't know there are between 11 and 12 million people of African descent in France. They never
Mhm.
think about that. But again, it was another European country. And then we go to South America, a place like Brazil and whatever, Caribbean, we're represented. But I think the thing is that we've had a common struggle for our identity as men, as fathers. And even though we've parented in a cultural context, and sometimes that cultural context, blinds us to what other possibilities that there are, and that gets away gets us away from learning from other folk. Because I think that the way to gain knowledge about the fatherhood work is in those places where people of African descent, people like you and I, have been fortunate to be able to advance certain ideas, project ideas that have taken hold, that folks in Africa, in Great Britain, throughout Europe, and throughout other parts of the world can really look at what we've done as a guideline, not necessarily a guideline, but a guideline for really how to plan a program. Because one of the things that's so important is that you don't have to reinvent the wheel.
That's
There's
right.
a lot of things, and so you have to apply it to your cultural condition. But be open-minded to the fact that when we talk about people of African descent, we're not talking about who's the best or who had it worse and who didn't have it bad, all those other things. What we're talking about is that we've had a common struggle, and some of us have been dedicated to making sure that whatever we do, that we inform not only ourselves, but we can also inform others who've had that common struggle. And I think that's so important to understand, because when a person from African descent comes to the United States who's already a father, my job is not to necessarily teach him how to be a father, because he already knows how to be a father. What I need to teach him when he's coming to America is what fathering is like in America. All right. So that he can use what he already knows, but also expand his repertoire to understand the cultural conditions of America to apply as a fathering in this context. And some of those things are going to be things that he's already done, but some of those things that he's learned, but some of those things are going to be different. It will be the same for me if I went and lived in another country. I've already parented my children. I think I know something about parenting, but I don't necessarily know what parenting is like in another cultural context. I've not had to do that, but I can learn from my brothers and my sisters who have done some of that, and build upon what I know and expand so I can adapt, and be successful in another, cultural situation, if you will. So I think that's important. I think,
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I think the other thing is really, I like the notion of the advocacy piece, because the advocacy element is a recognition, just like like evidence-based practice. What evidence-based practice is, it's a solution toward a problem, that's been identified. When you advocate, you're advocating for a problem that needs to be addressed, and it's important to be able to give voice to those things, but also realize that in the final analysis, you have to be in partnership with other advocates. I've had any number of times where I've addressed Congress in the United States about issues of fatherhood, and even in other parts of the world about fatherhood. But I could tell you that I would get no traction at all if I didn't have like-minded folks who gave the impression upon that politician of a critical mass of support for these ideas. And it's very important to understand that. It's like, I don't care, if I think that God intended the mission for me only, in no way you can do advocacy work by yourself, but it does require leadership. This is where the leadership comes in, because leadership is the act. Leadership is an art. It's a performing art. It is a performing art, because the reality is that it's hard to define, but you know it when you see it, you know it when you're around it. And sometimes those qualities of leadership that are necessary are in you. All right. But the question is, do you know yourself enough, self-aware of yourself enough to be able to act, when, for me, when God is talking to you? All right. To step on out there. And if you step on out there, one, you're not by yourself because he's with you, but he's going to bring, but others who have a like mind. And advocacy is something very important, because some of the changes that we need to happen, it's only going to come through advocacy work. Frederick Douglass once said, he said that power concedes nothing without a demand, right? And you got to demand, right? And that you got to have what a three-star general in the Air Force told me, a guy named Tom Clifford many years ago. He said, not only do you have to lead, he said, but you got to be thick-skinned. First time I ever heard that term, 30-something years ago, 40 years ago, from Tom Clifford. He said, you got to be thick-skinned. And which means to me, we got to be resilient. We have to believe in our cause. We join with others who believe in that same cause, and then we lead. And we lead, and leading is performance. It's an action. It's a set of actions. In a spiritual sense, it's putting feet to your prayers. All right. I mean, you have to, to show the way and model the way, and in the process of leading, to really to make it work for you. You have to give credit to small victories, because in the final analysis, it's the build up of small victories that leads to the big victory. It's a lot of times people, they try to go for the whole thing, and if they can't get the whole thing, they say it's not working. That's not true. And so, but it's lack of attention to the detail of what it really takes to accomplish something. And that is, you start small, and you build, and before you know it, you get the breakthrough. So that's important. And we talk about leadership in the book. We talk about the fatherhood field. We talk about how, the funding for fatherhood, or the lack thereof, has created a scarcity mentality. What does that mean? You got folks, for example, a lot of folks who get the federal grants, Dr. P, they won't talk to folks who don't have grants. Why? Because they think that they're going to share an idea with somebody else, and they're going to follow up on that idea, and they're going to get the money that they're supposed to get. Reality is that we have to approach this work with an abundance mentality. It's enough to go around for everybody to do good work. If you don't get it from the federal government, you get it from individual donors. If you don't get it from individual donors, you get it from private foundations. They're just, if those things are, then you become an entrepreneur. But the point is that there's enough to go around, and we don't have to be operating in a scarcity mentality. In the past, they would call something like that the crab in the barrel theory. The children's lives are at stake, and that we have to fundamentally understand that whatever we're going to do, we got to do in partnership. We have to do in collaboration. We have to be respectful of folks' roles, and we have to understand the role of elders. We have to understand the roles of emerging leaders, and we have to fuse those things together in such a way that we have the critical mass. I had a professor at University of Michigan, a guy named Dr. Harold Cruz. He was a endowed chair at the University of Michigan with an 8th grade education. So 8th grade, how to get an endowed chair? Well, in the past, remember, African Americans had to teach themselves, because they couldn't get a lot of universities faculty to sit with them on a dissertation committee to get their PhDs. But folks like him and John Henry Clark and others folks may have heard of, these were self-taught individuals. And he wrote a book called The Crisis of the Negro Intellectual. And what the crisis of the Negro Intellectual was all about was how you had the elder community who had learned, from the struggles dating back to 1619, and the emerging leaders who were kind of the foot soldiers of the Black Panther Party and some of these other groups that were forming, but they weren't talking. They weren't talking, and they weren't talking because, at that point in time, the view was that, we don't need to talk, we need to act. We need to do some other things instead of merging, because one of the things that he was saying that the intellectuals knew, they knew about the history, and they knew whether or not something was repeating itself, and they knew if they were allowed to be the coaches and the mentors and the elders that they wanted to be, they could have informed it, and those movements would have been, he said in his next book, that those movements could have been not only a rebellion, it could have been a revolution. What I mean? So when you say leadership, it involves a lot of what I'm saying here, and how do we create a legacy in the fatherhood field that's going to sustain over time. And that is not reinventing the wheel, cross across the diaspora, learning from others, learning their cultural context, and knowing how that my cultural context may apply to your cultural context in appropriate ways, but also to understand the importance of leadership in the context of the performing art necessary in order for people to be a part of a set of actions that produce transformational change.
As you spoke earlier, you talked about this funding thing and the lack of funding, and there are different areas that you can, as you stated, you can be an entrepreneur, or you can collaborate with other organizations, or you can go through grants and philanthropists. But what about encouraging policymakers to support the work, like in a different country? How would you say that, because they need funding in order for these organizations to be able to do training. It's not free. Somebody has to, pay to do it, or pay somebody to do it.
Well, see, well that involves, you know, particularly if it's a country that has some financial challenges, and there are many, But when you have the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, these are for the most part philanthropic groups, and what they're looking for in certain from certain countries is for countries to do white papers and other things that show how they're trying to best their country, how they're trying to improve things. And these are some of the ideas that could be taken to the World Bank and to International Monetary Fund, some of these other bodies like that, and to get grants and other resources to be able to do those things. And so I remember we were doing work in South Africa many years ago, in a couple of years post apartheid period, and it was a country to be best understood as coming from a long war, and even though they were able to, the African National Congress and others were able to come in charge of the government, they didn't come in charge of the business and the money, and there was a lot of flight from South Africa of folks who had with money. But the upshot of it is that Ron Mincy and I had an opportunity to address the congressional committee, which would be the equivalent of the Human Resources Committee, House Ways and Means Committee here in the United States, in the South African Parliament. And the thing that was interesting to me was that they were pursuing support for the very ideas in which you're talking about, Stuart. And basically, what they had me and Ron do was to read some of the white papers they had written and some of the proposals that they wanted to submit to the World Bank and to the IMF and these other groups to get support for South Africa in the area of social development. All right. And so these are, again, there's no, one way in which to do that, but my experience has informed me on ways in which that could be done. And then you have, foundations like, the Ford Foundation. These are international foundations, you know what I mean? And so at one point, we were about to have the first fatherhood conference in South Africa through Ford Foundation funding. It didn't happen, but we were planning it. And it's a long story about how it didn't happen, and it had nothing to do with the Ford Foundation support. Suffice to say that we had the money, we sent the money, and that was the end of it.
Well, you spoke about advocacy, and there are. When I went to the Bahamas, I talked to some young kids, and you and I had this conversation where, I asked them how many of them had fathers, and they were all in a room because they were in this room for detention, for fighting, for bullying, for drugs, gangs. Uh, and so the young lady said, uh, I don't need a daddy. I got my mommy, you know, you know, I don't need a father. But when we talk about developing and organizing a sustainable advocacy process, in terms of, you know, the benefits of fathers and families that will be uh, benefactors of the service offered. What advice would you suggest that they can start moving in that direction? Because you don't know what you miss until you have it. When people say, "Well, what I've never had, I've never missed," that's not true.
It's not true. You know what I mean? Like, listen, I talk about South Africa a lot, but I never understood the beauty of a country until I went to South Africa. You know what I mean?
Mhm,
I may have thought that I need to go to South Africa, but let me tell you, having been to South Africa more than a dozen times, I needed South Africa
mhm,
in my mind, in my bloodstream. I needed it, but I
mhm,
didn't know it until I got exposed to it. And
mhm,
and and I think that again, some of the adaptive, cultural manifestations of people of African descent has been, to deny, you know, uh, persons like fathers in their lives. And again, I'm not going to cast aspersions on them, because I'm not going to say that they're even operating at a deficit. But
mhm,
what I am going to say, how do you know you don't need a father until you really understand what a father really does and the value of fathering in the lives of folks who've had a father. And see that's the point. And again, it's interesting going back to South Africa again. We really try to implement some of the intervention programs that we have in this country over in South Africa, or at least that was our recommendation, to their equivalent of the Congressional Research Service when we were doing work over there. And we went back and forth, with the Committee on Social Development, the agencies that were doing it, some of the NGOs over there we're working with. But let me tell you what they concluded. They concluded that with the resources that they had, what they need to do is invest in the next generation of parents. In other words, invest the money in terms of males into male development, into use that as a way of educating young males in a broader way of family responsibility of parents and those type of things, as opposed to using their resources to intervene in situations that were already, kind of not functioning well. And those are some of the choices that countries have to make about whether or not to intervene, with parents now, or invest in a future generation of parents who have a broader view of things and who are taught the value of both mothers and fathers, because it's phenomenally impossible, for a child to come into the world without a father.
mhm,
It's just
mhm,
it can't happen. You know what I mean? It's like if you're in my faith tradition, we know about that story. All
mhm,
right, and
mhm,
some of us, who are readers of Greek mythology or Egyptian mythology, we've come across the whole notion of what I might call the virgin birth. All right,
mhm,
but
mhm,
outside of the Immaculate Conception, outside of Greek and Egyptian mythology, the only way a child comes into the world is when mothers and fathers come together to bring that child into the world. And that
mhm,
and the value of the father is that the mother can't have the child without the father. It
mhm,
doesn't happen. She can't
mhm,
just have the baby by herself. But the question becomes, at the point in which a child is thought about and conceived, the question is whether or not we've taught our children what it means to be responsible parents. All right. And that's an educational process. And
mhm,
that is throughout the diaspora. And to
mhm,
understand that the gaps in our family life have a lot to do with, our the historical subjugation and the diminishing of families, that happened during slavery, because, we couldn't have families. We were bringing children to the world, but we were not quote unquote families. We couldn't marry and those things, and that's part of our history, and maybe it's a kind of a epigenetic thing that some of us think globally that maybe that was something that was supposed to happen. No, that was not supposed to happen.
mm-mm,
All right, that was not supposed to happen. All right, it was not supposed to happen. and what we got to do, as leaders, as educators, and we have to invest, in future generations. You know what I mean? You know, see, we have the opportunity in this country, as you know, uh, to intervene. All right, we have the policies in place to do that. All right, which we can exchange ideas around those policy formulations with other folks of African descent in the diaspora. But what it may require in terms of implementation, may be a focus on prevention more so than intervention, given the level of support that you might have to undertake these types of things, short of a policy. But again, the private foundations and these other bodies, what they allow you to do is to have your program invested in to really solidify, that as a area of need, and then you can use the evidence collected through those projects that you get supported, to really take to the government officials and really advocate for the policies that are necessary to expand those things at a broader level. But it's about being able to again look out for each other at home and abroad, and sharing ideas and thoughts, and to use those things that might apply to the advancement of these particular situations and areas that we're trying to advance.
You talked about offline about you guys going to Bermuda, and could you share a little bit about that experience?
Well, Ron Mincy and I, we've kind of been around the world, kind of working on these fatherhood issues. And again, Bermudans are people of African descent for the most part, and their evolutionary path has been similar to those of us in this in the Western Hemisphere. Uh, systemic racism, uh, um, colonialism, has influenced our evolution, and particularly in terms of some of the jobs, that we ended up in. For example, many of the Bermudan men were working for the utility companies, and when the utility companies started to go under, then they had to, change, careers.
Mm-hmm.
And the careers that were available for the most part in Bermuda, even today, is in, offices and the insurance industry. And then you had a big issue with regards to a lot of the men not wanting to go into those type of jobs, not viewing those jobs, quote unquote, as manly. All right. And that has a lot to do with socialization, because the socialization was that, what makes you a man is your brawn, not necessarily your brain. And that, you're not really fulfilling a man's job if you're doing office work. And that's not true. But the point is that it's difficult coming in from another country and trying to broaden that perspective of how careers can be seen in a more broader way. That's certainly what Dr. Mincy tried to do down there, and I tagged along with him, at many community forums, to try to share thoughts and ideas about how men should see themselves and how they should look at expanding their career choices, particularly in areas that have promise and not necessarily rely upon those jobs that have become, obsolete. And so that's just, again, one of the manifestations of, again, how we were regulated to certain jobs. We got used to it, got socialized to it. Our grandparents did it, our parents did it, and then we believed that we needed to do it in order to be a certain construction of manhood, and that we have to, really do a lot of education, and again, I'm very careful not to say that the Bermuda men were wrong in their view of the types of job they should have. What I am saying, though, however, is that we can do a lot of things. I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
go back to what I said that John Gardner said. It applies every place in the diaspora. He said the successful person of the future is not a person who can do one job, but can do several jobs well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that works wherever we are in the world.
When you, and I know you know a lot about this because I know you started off with the funding. You actually wrote one of the first what was it, congressional federal government funding. What did you do for fatherhood?
Well, basically, what we had to do, which is the important track that you got us thinking on, and that is, we had to work towards a policy that would lend itself to providing support for fathers, particularly fathers who met a certain economic condition. That's very important because, again, you either want people to be tax burdens or taxpayers,
Mm-hmm.
and so in 1999, through a partnership with other advocates, we were able to get the Fathers Counts bill passed, which was the first federal legislative effort to support fathers to be the fathers who could be assets to their children and not necessarily liabilities, particularly in terms of the finances is concerned. Even though we know the father's role is much more than finances, nurturing, it's all those other things as well. And so, but again, that particular legislation led to subsequent legislation, which eventually ended up in what we call the 2005 Deficit Reduction Act, where we were able to add fatherhood funding onto what we call the Temporary Assisted Needy Families Program, and it's been there ever since. It's not a lot of money, but it's some there. And what we'd like to happen, and I've talked about this in the book, we think that the federal funding should, the grants should be smaller. Some of these grants are $2 million a year. You tell a person they got $2 million for fatherhood, and you ask them what they need for fatherhood, they're going to say $2 million. But when that happens, so I've done this work long enough to know that depending on the size of your program, $250,000 a year, $500,000 a year, it works, and spread it out because to date, that program has been around from 2005, but only not even half the states in the United States have actually received that money. And I think that's a challenge. I would like to see that those grants lower and give more people opportunity. Also, shorten the amount of time of those grants. Those grants are for 5 years. That means if you don't get one of those federal grants, you can't apply for 5 years. There's something wrong with
Yeah,
that. All right.
yeah, I
And then,
agree.
and then the other part of it is that, take that money and make sure everybody gets something. For example, I'm working with the Healthy Start program, and I'm dean of the Co-Parenting Learning Academy. 2 years ago, I was dean of the Fatherhood Learning Academy. And there are 101 Healthy Start agencies. The way they approached it on the maternal side of things, so you got the human side, then you got the health side. All right, but on the health side, what Healthy Start did is gave every Healthy Start site money to do fatherhood. All right, so there's no competition, and so everybody is working, trying to do it, as opposed to competing against each other. Having the scarcity mentality kind of thing. And it's money to get started. Why? Because see, many of these agencies have the ability to do it already, and what the monies that they have now is allowing them to see how working with fathers is a vital part of their mission and become a part of the overall service delivery system that they're doing. But the resources are to each of the Healthy Start sites, as opposed to having a competition for a limited amount of money where only a few people get it. Some people get it over and over again, and it's really not, even though it's a federal program, it's not a national program because it's not administered in a way that allows enough people to get access to it. And if that was to occur, I think what would happen is that folks who get the resources, then they could go to their states, they could go to foundations and get matched resources if they were able to get some resources. But again, the way it's set up right now, only few folks benefit, and some states have never got fatherhood money, and by not getting it, uh, have not been motivated to do very much with fatherhood either.
Yeah. So when you say, okay, let me ask you this with regard to the funding for responsible fatherhood initiatives, in addition to the efforts to get support from the government policymakers, what thoughts do you have regarding generating private financial support for the work?
I think that's very important. I think that's very important, and that's kind of where the entrepreneur element comes in. There are things that we can do in the fatherhood space that really generates resources, income. For example, for many years, I was getting funding from Ford Foundation, millions of dollars or whatever. Dr. P, that money ran out, right? And so I had to figure out a way to keep my doors open, all right? And so, and to not only survive, but to thrive. And so what I began to do is write curriculums, different curriculums, publish different books, and to do training and whatever. And all need to say to you is that I'm as busy as I ever been in the fatherhood space, with my own kind of entrepreneurship and private financing. All right, and
Mhm.
because and that's so important to understand that there are ways in which we can carve careers in the area, to support the work we're doing, and then we have the conferences and those type of things. So you don't. I'm not trying to get rich, Dr. P, and so that might rub some people in the wrong way because I want to earn a lot of money. Well, I can say you listen. You can earn enough money to support yourself and to have a nice lifestyle doing this work. But as an entrepreneur, and I'm a social entrepreneur,
Mhm.
and so you got that part of it. But I think the other part of it is getting some of our the folks like the Oprah Winfrey's of the world, and Michael Jordan. And listen, they are doing things. All right, they are doing things, but we got to get them invested in what we're doing. All
Mhm.
right, and so the question is, how do we form the partnerships to make the case, so that they see the value of investing in us, and we've not done that. We've not
Mhm.
done that. In the
Mhm.
same ways in which a lot of our traditional civil rights and other kind of urban organizations, I can tell you right now, uh, when it comes to fatherhood, uh, they've not been a part of that thinking.
Mhm.
And maybe it's because some folks believe poverty is such a big thing to come over that it's not worth spending time with. Maybe you want to do something else. What I mean? But I can tell you over the years, some of our more traditional organizations, I'm not going to just name names, but some of our traditional organizations, they've never been a part of what we're talking about with fatherhood, and that's been a bit perplexing. But at the same time, we got to keep moving ahead and try to bring them along as best we can. But I do think that there's some cases to be made within the generosity of our community. For example, we give to groups like the United Way and others. And that's a program where if you get a part of these various campaigns, you get your number. You can get investment in your program through that. A lot of fatherhood programs don't take advantage of United Way funding. You should. For
Mhm.
example, another big group that we work with Catholic Charities.
Mhm.
Several of our projects around the country are funded by Catholic Charities. And so you got those resources coming. So there's just a lot of ways to do it, and to be creative about it. But that's why it's important for folks to come to our
Mhm.
conference, that's going
Mhm.
to be held June 6th through the 8th at the Pro Football Hall of Fame, June 6th and 8th. And we're going to be talking about how do we honor the past while embracing the future. And many
Mhm.
of the things that we're talking about here, Dr. P, we're going to be talking about at the conference because it is a place to gather and ideas. And for those of you who can't attend in person, I want to let your audience know from around the world that it will be also virtual. And so you can gain access virtually. You can visit our website at www.npclfathersandfamilies.org and to find out more information. And I would certainly like that international element that we started out with. When we first had our first conference, one of the investors in the conference was the Bernard Van Leer Foundation out of The Hague. That in order to get their support, we had to add the name international to our fatherhood conference. And
Mm-hmm.
for the first 7 or 8 years of the conference was around 25 years, the first 7 or 8 years of the conference, the Bernard Van Leer Foundation would provide scholarships from to practitioners from other countries, possibly from other countries, to come to our international fatherhood conference to exchange ideas and to network and to find ways to do this work. And so we need to revisit some of those things and encourage our foundations in other countries to be willing to support us in our efforts to improve the lives of children.
Absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned that so that they can, go on in and watch this from, wherever
Anywhere in the
they're.
world.
But I have one last question. This question is talking about motherhood.
Okay.
Is it realistic to encourage fatherhood practitioners to place significant emphasis of responsible motherhood as a
Oh,
part of the delivery of fatherhood
let me tell
services?
you something. Listen, no motherhood, no fatherhood. All right, and because that is because how laws are written around these type of things, particularly in divorce and separated cases, but also in the context of when parents don't marry, the gatekeeping kind of role that the resident parent plays, that's typically mother, in terms of including the father in to allow access or not allowing the father access. And so I think that one of the real significant directions that we have to go in fatherhood to make the fatherhood programs work, we have to begin to work with mothers, and we have to give them similar content knowledge, and we have to move them in the same directions so that at the end they can be in some type of agreement and understanding of the value of both, and how it's not healthy for either to gatekeep, and it's not healthy for either to talk bad about the other. Matter of fact, the research says that the worst thing that can happen to a child is growing up and seeing their parents in conflict.
Mm.
The worst thing. But at the same time, I think that some of the conflict, in the context of the work that we do, is that we don't give mothers and fathers, the same content knowledge, with the view being that if the child stays with the mother or the father, that the one the child is staying with doesn't need an education. All they need are other services, but nothing related to education. And what my argument is that they both need education so that they can find out how valuable they both are in the life of the children. And studies prove that over and over again.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Is there anything responsible fatherhood advocates can do to ensure that trained staff continue to stay involved and dedicate to the work? And this is especially, when we talk about this significant if adequate funding becomes a problematic.
See, the key, just like any educational endeavor, it's investing in your teaching core. All right. And so in the fatherhood work, it's the practitioner core. And that what we want fatherhood programs to know, particularly in terms of successful implementation, is that you have to develop your staff. You have to invest in professional development. And that might be some ways in which you can get funding for that. Because do you know, Dr. P, I talked about those federal programs of fatherhood that's been around since 2005. You know what the turnover rate is, Angela, in any of those programs?
Hmm.
70%.
Hmm.
7 of every 10 persons who start working in fatherhood program leave within a year or 2 years. All right. And I think that has a lot to do with not being able to articulate a career perspective or path for those folk. I think the other part of it is not investing in them professionally. All right.
Hmm.
Because the more you know how to do this work, the more that you can see yourself being a difference, the more that you can have a world-class approach to your parent education. You're going to stay with that, but a lot of organizations see investing into to professional development of their fatherhood folks as a fluff. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
It's like, why they do it? Why are they doing that? And when in any school system, prior to the school year, all right, before the students come, they always have in-service training,
Mm-hmm.
because they're about to educate the students on what's new, what's worked that from the old. Why would we think that our work in educating parents is any different? And we
Mm.
have to do that, and we have to make that a part of our proposals, and we have to demand the funders to allow us to grow our staffs, because that's going to contribute to sustainability over time. Institutional memory. You
Mm.
cannot sustain effective practice when 7 of 10 of your practitioners are leaving the workforce, every year. You just can't do it. You can't. It's hard to kind of keep that together. And I think it goes right back to that. And right now, I can tell you right now, if I enter into a project, I let them know from the very beginning that I'm interested in professional development. Once I train them, I want to come back and do some quality improvement, to see whether or not they're doing stuff as they intended to be done, whether or not people are enjoying their job, whether or not people are responding properly. These are things that we have to do to professionalize our field. And I think that, developing those type of approaches and those kind of those standards are going to allow us to shine, and it's going to allow us to be seen as a movement of integrity that is working to make a difference now and in the future.
Well, you've heard it today on Can We Have a Conversation? We have the author, Dr. J, Dr. Jeffrey Johnson, cornerstone of responsible fatherhood, planning, implementation, and evaluation. Uh, this is a conversation that, I mean, we can go on and on and on, but I just wanted him to share the nuggets. I believe that he is a trailblazer in this field and is leaving a legacy for younger guys like me to follow, and just add to what he has already put to work. So thank you so much for joining us. If you could tell us about your conference one more time, about the email, so people can come on and
Okay.
join.
Right. The conference it's called. It'll be held June 6th through the 8th. It'll be at the Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio. It'll be both in person and virtual. To get access to information about the conference, you can go to our website at www.npclfathersandfamilies.org. That's npclfathersandfamilies.org, and get information. And we want a worldwide connection with the conference, because we all need to, share these ideas and support one another in our quest to make the lives better for families and children.
All right. Until the next time, God bless you. Go with God as God goes with you. Again, Dr. J, it's a pleasure. Until I see you again, God bless you.
Thank you, Dr. P.